And here's another sort of big commercial application from one of the important contributors to the individuals involved in the NIST subgroup, requirement subgroup. That's disaster recovery. So disaster recovery is an important area, and clouds are wonderful for it. Namely, for example, this laptop I have here is backed up on an ongoing basis to the cloud. And since I've done that, I no longer take all these dreadful backups I used to take. And I no longer have lots of disks with lots of partial backups. Um, so, but more broadly and more thoroughly, one needs to actually have a backup plan and a disaster recovery plan for the enterprise data. And that has to involve people, the processes, the technology, and also the overall governance, which involves security and privacy. Um, and we have actually replication and backup, and the data is replicated every 4 hours. At least that's the estimate here. And these data snapshots are retained for 7 days. And the complexity, and so obviously this is there are many commercial companies having entries in this field, and as far as the classification of this use case is concerned, is pleasingly parallel largely. Every file which has to be backed up can be backed up independently, so there are no important global constructs. It's pleasingly parallel, and the parallelism is not actually over the data in some senses, over the files, because nobody when you're doing the backup, it doesn't matter what's in your file. All that matters is there are bits there. You don't have to interpret the bits, and you don't really get data till you have interpreted bits. Here's another simple example. Well, it's not actually a simple example. It's actually a very important example. We have highlighted the Internet of Things, noting that there are going to be 75 billion things on the Internet by 2020. And one important example is just the global trucking and and sending of purchases, which FedEx, UPS, and DHL do. This was sort of had a lot of recent publicity at Christmas 2013 because the bad weather actually delayed all the delivery of the growing number of purchases from internet stores. So this is pointing out that this actual process can be monitored in a much more sophisticated fashion, a more active fashion, and you could have things sprinkled on the packages, on the sites where the packages are, so that any time you can find out exactly where your package is and whether it's got lost or not. And there's a general picture on the following slide showing how trucks are monitored and go between warehouses, and they have different modes of transportation, and they have containers and pallets and other types of transportation units. And there are various standards involved here because you have lots of different people producing packages and many shippers of packages. So this particular diagram is, I think, futuristic, because although there's obviously a lot of use of sensors like RFID and things like that, it's still not probably as sophisticated as it could be. Here we have a couple of use cases, one from a data point of view and the next from a simulation point of view, covering materials. And the world is full of materials. So, because when you manufacture something, you build it from materials. And as we go to 3D printing and everything, everybody's going to be manufacturing. We're going to having personalized manufacturing. So, and these materials obviously have very different properties. And as it says here, hundreds of billions of material decisions are made every year, but the actual adoption of a new material is a very time-consuming process because it is not automated and not very well supported by technology. So we can talk about the materials genome, which is sort of the idea is that the list of all materials can be electronicized and made in a much more sophisticated fashion. And also we can have repositories of materials and repositories of materials data which support discovery. The claim is the current approach is necessarily very conservative because the data is very poorly organized and very difficult to make reliable decisions. And another aspect which we'll come back to in the next use case is simulations can be important in enhancing our knowledge about materials. So in the future, the expectation is that these simulations will actually become more important. And just as we do drugs by a combination of simulation and experiment, we're going to do materials by a combination of simulation and experiment. And there have to be standards to allow the different stakeholders to talk to each other. And we need to have proper procedures, proper databases, which may or may not be SQL or NoSQL. And we need to be able to visualize these materials and make good decisions. So this is pointing out that manufacturing is going to be potentially revolutionized by building the digital material genome. So examples could be materials for making batteries, and there's a lot of effort, especially in the Department of Energy, to do massive simulations to look at the white spaces of design. And you can look at just a simulation in the aerospace industry allowed you to just go over many possible ideas for the design of a wing. Simulations in the materials world can go over many different choices for complex materials. So here we have the actual software used. The one I know best is NWChem, which is a very large simulation developed within the Department of Energy, especially at Pacific Northwest Labs. And they actually use pretty ingenious early parallelization technology. So it's a very well-known package. And those run on supercomputers, and those produce the results which get fed into the materials genome repository. And then you're going to need to do machine learning and build knowledge systems that integrate data from publications, experiments, and simulations to support materials. Now, I note in the corresponding biology case, it's already well known the same is true, that you can get results not only from measurement, but also actually from analyzing papers, because so many papers are published, and there are too many for any one person to look at, so you can actually need to mine papers automatically, and those papers are sort of labeled by the name of the substances, and the same with materials. Those papers on materials are labeled by the things that materials are composed of, so you can actually do a very thoughtful analysis through such an analysis of existing data, surveying existing data. So we have here a new category, HPC, which is just high performance computing, and we will find other examples of that later on. This field, like the other examples, like when we do say astronomy, we have high performance computing to predict the makeup of stars and how they evolve through galaxies. And we also have observation of stars and galaxies. In this case here with materials, we have simulations of materials and data on materials coming from experimental observation. It's worth noticing that the simulations actually are also parallelized. The simulations, like in the material is a three-dimensional object. You take the space occupied by the material, divide it up into a bunch of mesh points, characterize, say, the density of the material or the polarization of the material or the particular fraction or makeup in terms of its component parts, and then you do the parallelization over the mesh points with these characteristics. And we end up with a huge database of material properties, and we will also get parallelism over that database. So that's the end of the commercial applications. You notice that the last one was actually a mix of sort of research, the simulation of materials, and commercial. So that's the end of that particular lesson. Thank you very much.